Hi, how are you? My name's Simon Greenhill, and I'm also known as Daddy Funk. So the name's inspired, in the 90s I was in a band called Funkabubble, and the young lead singer of the band, his name was Ed. He was a lot younger than me. I was about 28 and I just was newly married and I had my first daughter, and he was 17 and a bit of a lad. So it was a piss take. He was just like, Daddy Funk, Daddy Funk. And I was like, do you know what, Ed? I'm having that and I'm going to use it. And I've used it ever since. It's now a registered trademark. And so yeah, Daddy Funk. Okay, so Daddy Funk Drums it's mainly a drum tuition business, and that's been going for nearly 3 decades now. But it's also, I do master classes, I'm involved in various projects. There's also merchandising, such as this and that. And I have my music out worldwide, so I've got 4 albums out at the moment as a recording artist. That's an interesting question. It's the cult of personality in a funny sort of way, because I've always been a professional musician and somebody who was a professional creative, so I got heavily involved in fashion at one point. But the business is, at its core, it's about drum teaching. So it's about teaching a variety of people, now I would say up to 90% adults, to learn how to get excited about drums. But it's also about putting across the joy of music and the reality of music, because I have been a professional musician most of my life, pretty much all of my life so far, and I think that that's a relatively unusual thing, to be able to spend time around a real player. My interest in drumming began, well, I'm one of these people, this is genuinely true, I'm one of these people who has a memory, and I can trace it back to I was about 3, and I was sat on the kitchen floor because I've got this vivid memory of pots and pans around me and wooden spoons, and I was looking up at my mum, and I know that I must have been around 3 because the place that I remember we left when I was about 4 or 5. So I have an early memory of rhythm and wanting to play drums. And then I physically started taking drum kit lessons at the age of 11 at school. Oh, that's an incredibly difficult question. Okay, well, it has to be Buddy Rich. I saw Buddy Rich when I was 15 at the Royal Festival Hall in London. I went with my drum teacher, David Clifford, plus a whole group of sort of his favourite drum students. For those that don't know, Buddy Rich was one of the great drummers of all time, and it doesn't matter what style you're into. If you're a drummer, generally you have to accept that he was one of the greatest. He was just a magician. He played big band jazz, but there was usually within each and every track there was a drum solo. Then I would say those closely followed by Stuart Copeland from The Police, who was hugely influential in the late 70s and early 80s because he changed the way that people approached a drum kit, myself included, and the sound of the kit as well. Lots of splashes and very high-tuned snare drums was quite unusual at that point. And then I would say probably also John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, who you can't really avoid. And in later years in my career, Gregory Coleman, who played the Amen break, I think is essential to the core of what I'm really into now, which is urban drumming. So speaking of the Amen break, I think it's essentially important. It became a real obsession of mine. I'm really into old school hip hop and drum and bass, And those two genres, still to this day, decades later, use the arm end break. And I did a series of videos which are on my YouTube channel called The History and Progression of Urban Rhythm. And they all start from the arm end break. The arm end break was 6-7 seconds of a piece of just pure drum kit drumming on the B side of a single that won a Grammy by the Winstons. What kind of drum kit do I use? Okay, so in 2001 I had an Orange County bespoke drum kit made in California. I was the first person in the UK to have one of these made, and it's got unusual things like a very shallow bass drum, very shallow, almost flat toms, and this enormous floor tom. And a little, these days they call popcorn snares with like vents in them and stuff. I'm endorsed by Istanbul Agop Cymbals, so all of my cymbals are Agop. I'm also endorsed by Yamaha Drums, so I have a second kit, and that's a kit that Yamaha Drums gave to me as an educator. And and then I use various bespoke snare drums. The sort of top end of musical instruments is handmade. So if you can start using handmade instruments, they're just going to sound 100 times better. I used to run a lot of bands from sort of the late 80s through until I think I stopped doing live work somewhere around 2014 to 2016, somewhere around there. Other than that, no. The work that I did as a youngster, I worked in Tower Records for a few years in Piccadilly Circus in London in the 80s. Which is no longer there, but I worked for them for a long time in their jazz department. And then the other businesses I've done are things like, I worked in the catering industry, mainly big rock and roll restaurants in London in the 80s. But I became a professional musician full-time from about 1993. Who inspired me to start my own business? I would say my dad, actually. My parents have always been creative professionals. My father was a 60s fashion photographer, really quite a well-known and famous one. He had huge clients. So when I was a tiny boy in the late 60s, my dad was doing that. And then ever since then, Dad's always been self-employed, so's Mum. Mum was an actress, and then they both moved into doing art from home. So they've always worked from home. They've always done, their own tax returns and had very successful businesses right up to the day that my dad died. So I think I would say my parents, actually. My first objective when I founded Daddy Funk Drums was to help people to get really inspired by drumming and become good at drumming, because I knew that I could put that across. I did acting as a kid to a very high standard in London. I was in the West End of London for 2 years on stage. So I thought, well, this ability to speak well is something I can use, as well as my ability to, I've always been a singer, and I've always, I've been doing drums since I was 11. So I thought, well, that's really, my objective is to get people into drumming. And I would say in 3 decades, that has definitely happened. I think what interested me about teaching was, yes, this ability to really get other people as into drumming as me. Drumming is a very interesting thing to do, in the sense that there's a very big neurological component. It's four-way coordination, which, other than possibly driving, you don't really do that in anything else. It's extremely visceral. It's a powerful thing to do, but then boys and girls, men and women can do it. And there's something, I mean, if I may say so, there's something quite sort of transcendent about it, really, because I mean, it goes back thousands of years as a form of communication, but then also, I think, as a recognised thing, you know, it has military application for hundreds of years, and then the drum kit was invented somewhere around 1911, is kind of what people believe, for jazz music, which at the time was pop music. So it's an interesting thing because it's relatively young, and yet it goes back thousands of years. The future of Daddy Funk drums. I'm really interested in getting more into masterclasses. Something interesting that happened with Daddy Funk drums during the great pandemic is I got more into doing online work. That's opened up my ability to work much further afield. So I live now in Northern Scotland, and I doubt very much I'll ever move from Northern Scotland because I love it. However, I can still teach in London, Manchester, Birmingham, you know, south coast of England. And the master classes, I think, is the way I want to go. I also want to do more films like this. I'm interested in getting involved in documentaries and putting my ideas across. I recently launched a new website, which is e-commerce. I'm very interested in getting the merchandising, of which there's a variety of different things that one can purchase. I'm interested in opening that up more. Yeah, and of course the next thing that will be happening is I'm going to be doing my 5th album. So there's 4 albums out at the moment on all of the streaming platforms. You can literally buy it and listen to it anywhere in the world. So that's 16 years of recording work, 35 tracks, 4 albums. And that's something I've always been very, very interested in, is recording studio work. I find that the most fascinating as a professional musician, because it's a bit like if you're an artist, you want to get your films out there or your paintings out there. And for me, capturing magic on, well, these days it's on hard drives, I think is fascinating. So there is a new album slated, and it's one that I'm very excited to do. So my music partner that I work with, Jamie King, is talking about coming up and staying with me in this house, and we're probably going to spend maybe a week or 2 weeks trying to record an album, bearing in mind that some of my albums, like Superhuman, took 7 years on and off, and Earthfire took 3 years. So it'll be very interesting to see whether we can put an album together in 2 weeks. Expansion for my business. Yeah, I think the main ones really are doing more recorded music over the next 20 years. Masterclasses, really keen on doing masterclasses. Anybody out there? Online masterclasses can be anywhere in the world. Local masterclasses can be anywhere in Scotland. Masterclasses, honestly. I think also getting more close and in touch with my endorsees, endorsers, I don't know which way around that is, because I've had a very good relationship with those guys for some time now, and that's an exciting part of being a drummer. I mean, I have sticks with my logos on. I basically got 6 signature drumsticks. So that's a huge later development in my career, which I think is really important. But yeah, albums, masterclasses, more precise teaching. I now very much choose who I'm going to work with. I don't just work with anybody, because I've been doing it for the best part of 30 years, and I only want to work with people who are able to get inspired and give me something back. How successful have I been? I think very successful. I think had I have got like a major label record contract, it wouldn't have been as good as what I have now. I think the teaching has been amazing. The endorsements, I'm very honoured to be working with Yamaha Drums, Istanbul Agop Cymbals and Los Cabos Drumsticks, who I absolutely stand by. All of their products are amazing. Yeah, and I've worked with some of the best musicians available on my albums, which I'm exceptionally proud of. They've all been digitally remastered during the whole lockdown period. They're all out there now worldwide. So I would say very successful. I've got my own branded clothing, and yeah, I'm very, very happy, and I live somewhere very, very beautiful, and I live a nice life. So I would say that's success.
Are you ready?